Hi everybody, Dr. Mike here. In this video, we're taking a look at how our kidneys can help regulate acid-base balance. Let's take a look. So to begin, we need to talk about that beautiful equation, the bicarbonate buffer equation, which I'm sure you're familiar with. You know that all the cells of our body that undergo metabolism need to create ATP, energy, and they do this by taking proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, right? Proteins, fats, and carbohydrates are all made up of carbons, hydrogens, and oxygens. And the process of metabolism is pretty much about stealing the hydrogens to give to the electron transport chain to make ATP. But what we're left with is carbons and oxygens. That's carbon dioxide. That is the exhaust fumes of the body. We need to get rid of it. So all the cells of our body are making CO2, making carbon dioxide. To get it to the lungs to get rid of as an exhaust, it needs to jump into the blood. And we know that most of our blood is made up of water. And in doing so, they combine to form an acid. This acid is called carbonic acid, which is H2CO3. There's the 2 hydrogen, there's the 1 carbon, there's the 3 oxygen. Definition of an acid, at least my definition, is it hates itself, so it splits itself apart and it produces hydrogen ions and bicarbonate ions. And we've spoken about in a previous video the respiratory regulation of acid-base balance, which has to do with this end. Obviously, our lungs deal with carbon dioxide. So our lungs deal with this side of the equation. So think about it like this, just as a quick preface. If you increase your carbon dioxide levels, it binds to more water, pushes the equation in that direction, and will ultimately produce more hydrogen ions, making your blood more acidic. This can happen in situations where you retain carbon dioxide and can't breathe it out. Things like emphysema, for example. All right? Or, if we think about the opposite, if we blow out too much carbon dioxide, we might be anxious or stressed and hyperventilate. If we breathe out all of our carbon dioxide, it binds to less hydrogen ions, less. So the equation is pushed in this direction where whatever hydrogen ions we have remaining will bind to the bicarbonate to try and re-establish our carbon dioxide. But that means our hydrogen ion levels drop. So we become more alkalinic if we get rid of our carbon dioxide. So importantly, this side of the equation is dealt with by our lungs and it can regulate our hydrogen ion concentration. What we want to talk about now is this side of the equation. The bicarbonate can be handled by our kidneys. And again, increasing or decreasing the amount of bicarbonate. So think about it like this, for example. What if something happens to introduce too many hydrogen ions into the blood? So let's just say you do a lot of vigorous exercise and you produce lactic acid. By definition, an acid hates itself and releases hydrogen ions into the solution. Now that means we're becoming too acidic, but luckily for us, the bicarbonate in our blood will bind to it, push it in this direction, and hopefully what happens when you do a lot of vigorous exercise and you produce a lot of acid? You produce a lot of carbon dioxide and you hyperventilate to get rid of the excess acid. So luckily, we've got our respiratory system working here. But if that wasn't working very well, this side would need to compensate. And so if the hydrogen ion levels go up here, we would need to produce more bicarbonate. And so the question is, how do we produce more bicarbonate? And this is where our kidneys come into play. So our kidneys can actually do 3 things to help regulate this acid-base balance. It can, 1, reabsorb bicarbonate. We can reabsorb bicarbonate. So our kidneys filter everything that's small enough, right? And then reabsorbs pretty much all of it back into the body. It can manage our pH by excreting, that means peeing out, hydrogen ions. And the third thing that it can do is it can generate new bicarbonate. Generate new bicarbonate if we need it. So that's how the kidneys can regulate our acid-base balance. This is not the short term. Lungs, short term. Right now, if I hyperventilate, I could tweak my blood pH. If I held my breath, I could tweak my blood pH. Short term. This is hours to days, is the way that the kidney regulates it. So you can do these three things. Let's take a look at how it does it. So first thing you need to understand, if you haven't done renal yet, which I assume that you have, but let's just, as a quick preface, if you've got your kidneys, right, you've got anatomically the cortex of the kidney and the medulla of the kidney. And you've got blood entering. You've got your abdominal aorta, and then you're going to have your renal branch. Right, so you've got your renal artery, blood entering the kidneys. Now, it branches multiple times. I've done a video on the renal arteries. It branches multiple times, and ultimately the blood will go into the cortex. In the cortex, we have our filtration unit called our nephron. And our nephron is like a little snake. There's the snake head, and it's its body that goes like that. Now, effectively, this blood vessel will go in and form a little capillary called a glomerulus that goes in, and it filters and moves all the substances through these tubules of the nephron. And whatever ends up at the very end here will move through and exit as P, right? So if I were to just make that a little bit bigger, right? Make this whole thing a little bit bigger. Have a look at this nephron in a bit more detail. Let's just say there's the Pac-Man head, or the head of the snake, and let's just say there's part of the body, right? The tubules. You've got, let's say the blood's entering here. So we've got blood entering here, forms a capillary bed, and exits. And here we filter anything small enough gets pushed through this capsule and will move through this tubule, right? If it keeps moving through the tubule, it exits as P. Now the thing is, we filter 180 liters of blood per day. Now, we don't want to, so we make 180 liters of filtrate every single day. We don't pee out 180 liters. What do we pee out? 1.8 liters per day. That's only 1%, which means we need to throw 99% back into the body. How do we do it? We've got cells that line these tubules, and luckily for us, this blood vessel that leaves is intimately related to these tubular cells. So of pretty much 99% of everything that gets filtered, we need to take from here and throw it into the tubular cell, and then take it from the tubular cell and throw it into the blood vessel, because then that goes to the body. So that's what we need to look at now. So when we talk about bicarbonate reabsorption, all the bicarbonate gets filtered, but we want to reabsorb all of it. So let's talk about and show you how that happens. So we're going to draw it up like this. We're going to have a tubule. We're going to have a tubular cell. And we're going to have the blood vessel. And we're going to draw that up 3 times. Okay, let's take a look. First one, we want to look at the reabsorption of bicarbonate. How do we reabsorb bicarbonate? So here's the tubule, right? Here's the tubule. Whatever comes out the end here, it will become P. This is the blood vessel. Whatever moves through the end here goes back to the body. And that's the tubular cell. Now, 80% of our bicarbonate gets reabsorbed at the proximal convoluted tubule. So for those of you that know, if this is the nephron, you've got the proximal convoluted tubule, descending limb, ascending limb, distal convoluted tubule, and collecting duct. 80% of bicarbonate gets reabsorbed there at the proximal convoluted tubule. So, what happens is, we are filtering into our tubule carbon dioxide. Because it's a gas, it's easy to get filtered. But because it's a gas, it's easy to get thrown back into the tubular cell. The other thing is, every cell that's living needs to undergo some degree of metabolism, so it will produce carbon dioxide itself. So not only does it get absorbed into the cell, it's producing carbon dioxide. Now, as you know, because of the equation, that carbon dioxide will bind with water, and it will produce carbonic acid, H2CO3. And that carbonic acid, because it hates itself, splits itself apart, to produce bicarbonate and hydrogen ions. Now, these hydrogen ions actually get thrown back or get thrown into the tubule. And it does this because something very important. You know the sodium-potassium pump. I told you it's my favorite enzyme. It is an enzyme in the body. What it does is it's located on the basolateral side of every cell in our body. And what the sodium-potassium pump does is it takes 3 sodium and throws it out of the cell, and takes 2 potassium and throws it into the cell, and it does this using ATP. That means this cell is deficient or mostly void of sodium. That's important because it means now that the sodium that's been filtered by our kidneys and entering this tubule, it actually has a concentration gradient that it can move down and just gets thrown back into the tubule to replenish it. But it's also then going to be thrown out via the sodium-potassium pump. When it comes in, it actually exchanges for hydrogen ions. Because we like to maintain some degree of balance, if a positive thing goes in, we swap it for a positive thing going out. Now, what do you think happens to the hydrogen ions here? We can't just pee out hydrogen ions because it changes the pH of that urine so much. We really don't want our urine to be less than 4.5 pH. If so, it's very disruptive and it can be a problem. And so if we want to maintain a urine pH greater than 4.5 and still just pee out free hydrogen ions, we'd need to pee out over 1,000 litres every day. Not possible. So we need to buffer that hydrogen ion in order to get rid of it, right? And we do that by binding it to, surprise, the bicarbonate that's been filtered. So the bicarbonate that's been filtered will enter, and that bicarbonate will bind to the hydrogen ions. Unsurprisingly, it forms H2CO3, carbonic acid, which splits itself apart to form carbon dioxide and water, and that water gets peed out. Effectively, the hydrogen ions get peed out as water. Wonderful. And the carbon dioxide re-enters. Now have a look at this. What happens to the bicarbonate? The bicarbonate gets sent back into the body. And it does this by piggybacking. Now, sodium can be thrown through the sodium-potassium pump, or it can go through a sodium bicarbonate symporter channel, right? Now, there's another way that bicarbonate can move across. It's through another channel, which is a chloride channel. I think this is called a pendrin, right? So the bicarbonate can also move through this way, and it does it by swapping it with chloride. Because a negative thing going out, negative thing must go in, right? Here, negative thing going out balanced by a positive thing. If a negative thing goes out, we need to balance it with a negative thing here. Okay, easy. So this bicarbonate can then get thrown back into the body. How wonderful. Now look at this. We've just reabsorbed bicarbonate. How? Let's first look at the sodium. We've reabsorbed sodium. Look at it. Sodium comes in, jumps back out, reabsorb sodium directly. But the bicarbonate's different. The bicarbonate goes in, then gets altered chemically, turns into carbon dioxide, which binds with water, reformed and then thrown out again. So even though we've taken that bicarbonate and reabsorbed it back into the body, it's not a direct reabsorption. This is where the textbooks make it tricky, because unlike sodium, which is a direct reabsorption, it's still a one-for-one reabsorption here. It's just been rearranged. Now, the other really important point here is this. For every bicarbonate that we've reabsorbed, we've excreted a hydrogen ion in the form of water. It's a 1-to-1 ratio of reabsorption of bicarbonate to hydrogen excretion. So at the same time that we reabsorb bicarbonate, we are excreting hydrogen ions. So we've just ticked off the first two in that process. And that's how we manage the pH at the kidneys using this under normal physiological conditions. Now think about this. What if we have too many bicarbonate ions? This is when it's a perfect scenario, right? So if I've got just as a as a random unit, 5 units of bicarbonate, 5 units of hydrogen ions, they perfectly match and go through this process. But what if we have 10 bicarbonate and 5 hydrogen? Well, they bind to each other, so that 5 disappears, but we've got 5 bicarbonate remaining. So we've got an alkalosis happening here. We've got too many bicarbonate ions. So what happens? Well, that bicarbonate can just be peed straight out. Easy. We've just re-established our pH through excretion of bicarbonate. We just don't reabsorb it. But what happens if it's the opposite? We've got 10 units of hydrogen and 5 of bicarbonate. They bind, we get rid of the bicarbonate, but we've got 5 units of hydrogen remaining. Okay, this is actually what happens every single day. Every single day, we produce hydrogen ions through our carbon dioxide, but luckily we can breathe most of it out. So this equation here accounts for most of the hydrogen ion management or pH management in the body, but we still have some excess hydrogen being produced. And then the question is, how do we manage it? I said you can't just pee hydrogen directly like we can bicarbonate because it makes it too acidic. That's a problem. So we need a new buffer to buffer that hydrogen out in order to be able to pee it out. And this is going to be this third part, generating new bicarbonate. You might think, wait a minute, that's not what we're talking about. Yes, it is. Let's have a look, right? We've got excess hydrogen ions. So where do we start? We start where we began last time. We've got carbon dioxide. It gets thrown back in. This cell also produces its own carbon dioxide, and that binds with water. That then produces H2CO3, carbonic acid, splits itself apart to produce bicarbonate and hydrogen ions. Those hydrogen ions get thrown into the tubular cell in exchange for sodium. But I said to you, in this scenario, we've used all our bicarbonate. We've got excess hydrogen. So unlike here where we can just bind to bicarbonate, we can't do that. And we can't just pee out that hydrogen. We need a new buffer. So for example, one buffer that we can use is the phosphate buffer, a very important chemical buffer. It's really important as an intracellular buffer and as a renal tubule buffer, like in this scenario. So what happens is HPO42 negative, hydrogen phosphate is its name, binds to hydrogen, produces dihydrogen phosphate, also known as phosphoric acid, and that can get peed out. Beautiful. Now in this instance, have a look. In the process of buffering the hydrogen ions through another buffer, that's not a bicarbonate buffer, we've actually generated new bicarbonate. We've just generated new bicarbonate through the buffering of hydrogen using another buffer. So when we've got excess hydrogen ions in the body and this buffer can't deal with it, the kidneys go, don't stress, I'll use the phosphate buffer. Not only will I get rid of that hydrogen ion, dropping it and helping re-establish pH, but I'll even make new bicarbonate to throw back into the body to try and level it out again. Beautiful, right? Now that's not the only way that it can do it. Another way that it can do it is through glutamine. So glutamine is an amino acid that the liver can produce. If there's too many hydrogen ions, glutamine can help bind hydrogen ions up. That's important, and sends them to the kidneys. And what happens is the glutamine that enters will actually get absorbed into the tubule. And glutamine can it breaks up into 2 bicarbonate and breaks up into 2 ammonia. So we have glutamine breaking up into 2 bicarbonate and 2 ammonia. Now a couple of things can happen in this instance. Remember I said we've got carbon dioxide binding to water, producing carbonic acid. That produces bicarbonate and hydrogen ions. Well, a couple of things can happen. One, the hydrogen combined with the ammonia and it produces NH4 positive, which can be thrown in to the tubule. That's called ammonium ion, and that can be peed out. Let's just write this down for you, right? NH3 is ammonia, and NH4 positive is ammonium ion, right? So they can bind and peed out. Or the NH3 can move here and bind with hydrogen in the tubule, because we know that that hydrogen also gets absorbed by swapping for sodium, and then forms the same thing and can be peed out. So through glutamine, we generate even more bicarbonate through glutamine. So the generation of new bicarbonate. So this is how the kidneys help manage our pH when it comes to reabsorbing bicarbonate, excreting hydrogen ions, and generating new bicarbonate. I hope that makes sense. Hi everyone, Dr. Mike here. If you enjoyed this video, please hit like and subscribe. We've got hundreds of others just like this. If you want to contact us, please do so on social media. We are on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Dr. Mike Todorovic, at DrMiketodorovic. Speak to you soon.